Imagine a machine that didn't just move people, but moved an entire nation forward. A mechanical heartbeat pulsing through a decade of optimism, grit, and newfound freedom. Picture a landscape where every road was a promise, every mile an act of defiance against distance itself. This wasn't a luxury toy or a fleeting trend. It was the key that unlocked America's sense of possibility. Metal met spirit and something timeless was born. It carried families, dreamers, and workers alike, bridging rural farms and growing cities with the same quiet determination. Long before our modern expectations of comfort and speed, this icon showed the country what progress could look like when ingenuity met necessity. Its design was honest, its purpose pure, and its impact immeasurable. Yet beneath the nostalgia lies a deeper question. How did one vehicle become the defining symbol of America's automotive awakening? Stay tuned because we're about to explore the machine that turned mobility into a movement. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which classic legend you'd like us to uncover next. The 1928 Ford Model A didn't arrive in silence. It landed like a statement. After nearly 2 decades of the Model T ruling the roads, America was ready for something more modern, more comfortable, more human. The Model A was that answer. From its first unveiling, it represented not just a car, but a recalibration of Ford's identity, a leap from utilitarian simplicity to a symbol of progress that ordinary Americans could actually touch. This wasn't a world of sleek highways yet. Roads were rough, expectations were modest, but people were changing fast. They wanted a car that looked as good as it worked, one that could keep up with a rapidly modernizing country. When Henry Ford announced the end of the Model T in 1927, it shocked the automotive world. The T had become more than a product. It was a national institution, with over 15 million sold. But Ford saw something the rest didn't. The tides of consumer taste were shifting. Americans wanted color, design, and refinement, not just durability. So Ford shut down production for 6 months, retrained his workforce, retooled his factories, and essentially bet the company on one new machine, the 1928 Ford Model A. From its first gleaming chrome grille to its striking two-tone paint schemes, the Model A felt fresh and confident. It carried the Ford name, but it looked like a car from the future. It was available in multiple body styles, coupes, sedans, roadsters, even pickups, offering something for everyone. This was revolutionary thinking for the late 1920s. No longer was a car simply transportation. It was a reflection of personality and success. A teacher, a farmer, and a small-town shop owner could each buy a Model A that fit their lives perfectly. That personalization factor tapped into something deeply American, the desire to stand out without breaking the bank. Mechanically, the Model A was a huge step forward. Gone was the crude planetary transmission of the T. Drivers now got a 3-speed sliding gearbox that made shifting intuitive, and for the time, almost luxurious. Under the hood, a 201 cubic inch 4-cylinder engine produced 40 horsepower, double that of its predecessor. It wasn't fast, but it was reliable, smooth, and easier to maintain. Ford even added safety glass to the windshield, a first for a mass-market car. These choices weren't about flash, they were about practicality, evolving into aspiration. But the real genius behind the Model A wasn't just what it could do mechanically. It was how it made people feel. Driving one wasn't a chore. It was an event. For the first time, Americans could step into a car that made them proud to arrive somewhere. The styling was cleaner, the proportions balanced, the interior thoughtfully arranged. In a country that was quickly electrifying and modernizing, the Model A felt like the mechanical embodiment of the American dream. Culturally, the timing was impeccable. The late 1920s were a period of wild confidence. Cities were booming, radios were singing, and people believed the good times would last forever. The Model A fit right into that energy. It wasn't just a car. It was part of a broader story about mobility, freedom, and optimism. Small-town families could now visit relatives across the state. Young couples could escape for Sunday drives. Businesses could reach customers miles away. Every turn of the Model A's steel wheels was a small revolution in daily life. Ownership of a Model A wasn't glamorous by modern standards, but it was transformative. Maintenance was simple enough that an average owner could handle it with a few basic tools. Replacement parts were easy to get. Ford dealerships became social centers in small towns, places where people gathered not just to buy, but to connect. Buying a car wasn't just a transaction anymore. It was a community experience, and Ford made sure everyone could get in on it. The pricing was sharp, affordable enough to be attainable, but aspirational enough to feel like a step up. The company understood that value was more than just low cost. It was about pride of ownership. People wanted something that made them feel capable, modern, and respected. The Model A delivered exactly that. Still, launching such a car wasn't without risk. The months-long production shutdown left competitors free to gain ground. A rival manufacturer could have easily used the gap to dominate the market. But when the Model A hit showrooms, crowds lined up for blocks. Reports described thousands of people waiting just to catch a glimpse. Orders flooded in faster than Ford could build them. In the first year alone, nearly 750,000 units were sold, and that was just the beginning. What Ford had pulled off was more than an industrial triumph. It was a cultural reset. He'd taken the narrative of the simple working man's car and evolved it into something elegant without betraying its blue-collar roots. The 1928 Ford Model A represented not just transportation, but transformation. The moment when the automobile matured from a mechanical curiosity into an expression of modern American life. That transition, from necessity to identity, was what truly set the Model A apart. It symbolized progress that was both tangible and emotional. You could feel it when you gripped the steering wheel, when you shifted gears, when you rolled down a paved street lined with new storefronts and neon signs. It was a tactile connection to the future. By the time 1929 rolled around, the Model A had become more than just a success. It was a phenomenon. Ford's decision to risk everything on reinvention had paid off spectacularly. But as the decade turned, the world was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. Economic clouds were forming, competition was intensifying, and America's love affair with the open road was about to be tested. The 1928 Ford Model A had set the stage for something greater, but it would soon have to prove whether innovation alone could survive the storm. The next chapter in this story isn't just about sales or engineering. It's about resilience, rivalry, and the way one car's destiny became intertwined with the fate of a nation. The 1928 Ford Model A had redefined what people expected from a car. Now it would face the hardest test of all, staying relevant in a world that was about to fall apart. The 1928 Ford Model A didn't just change what Americans drove, it changed how they thought about driving itself. Once the initial excitement faded, the Model A settled into daily life as a dependable companion for millions. But its story only grew more compelling as the economy, culture, and competition around it shifted dramatically. The Model A's arrival had proven Ford could reinvent itself, yet the next few years would test that claim with brutal intensity. When the stock market crashed in 1929, optimism evaporated almost overnight. The Great Depression began swallowing jobs, savings, and dreams. Amid all that chaos, the 1928 Ford Model A stood as a kind of survivor's tool, a vehicle that people clung to not just for transportation, but for stability. It wasn't a luxury car, and that was precisely why it endured. People trusted it. Mechanics knew it. It could haul goods, take a family to town, or serve as a makeshift delivery truck when businesses downsized. Ford's design, though conceived in prosperity, accidentally turned out to be perfect for hardship. Its 40-horsepower engine wasn't just reliable, it was forgiving. Owners could coax it back to life with minimal resources. Farmers used it to plow fields. Entrepreneurs turned old Model A's into service vehicles. The car became a symbol of American resourcefulness, proof that simplicity could outlast turmoil. Yet, even as people made do with their Model A's, competition was tightening. A rival automaker saw an opening in the changing mood and began emphasizing comfort and affordability in ways Ford had never prioritized. While Ford's engineering focus had been on practicality, others began pushing style, luxury, and quietness, traits that appealed to consumers desperate for a bit of hope. In this clash of philosophies, the 1928 Ford Model A became both hero and relic, a beloved machine from a rapidly receding era. But Ford wasn't blind to the challenge. The company's leadership, still dominated by Henry Ford and his son Edsel, understood that the market was evolving. The elder Ford, stubbornly attached to simplicity and control, clashed with Edsel's desire for modernization and design sophistication. The tension between father and son mirrored the larger cultural tug-of-war in America itself: efficiency versus expression, function versus flair. The 1928 Ford Model A sat right at that crossroads. Its clean lines and respectable trim hinted at Edsel's influence, while its rugged mechanical soul remained pure Henry. On the streets, that duality played out beautifully. Enthusiasts loved the Model A's responsiveness. It could reach 60 miles per hour on a good road, a remarkable feat for the time. Its four-wheel mechanical brakes offered confidence, though they demanded a strong leg and skillful touch. The solid front axle and transverse leaf springs made for a firm ride, yet drivers praised its balance and durability. For many first-time owners, the Model A wasn't just transportation, it was empowerment. It taught them the basics of driving: clutch timing, throttle control, mechanical sympathy. For countless Americans, their first taste of independence came behind that upright steering wheel. The Model A's popularity also spawned an unexpected culture of customization. As the Depression dragged on, older models were salvaged, repaired, and modified. Some became farm trucks. Others were turned into speedsters or homemade racers. This do-it-yourself spirit planted the seeds of what would later become America's hot rod movement. The 1928 Ford Model A, with its simple frame and robust engine, was perfect for tinkering. Teenagers could strip it down in a barn, learn mechanics firsthand, and craft something uniquely their own. What began as necessity evolved into creative expression, a legacy that still fuels car culture nearly a century later. Even as Ford introduced updates, the 1929, 1930, and 1931 variations, the essence of the 1928 design remained intact. The company made subtle improvements: sleeker body lines, better interiors, brighter colors. Each iteration reflected Edsel's growing influence on Ford's design language. But the Depression limited how much consumers could spend, and by 1932, the market had shifted again. People wanted more power, more comfort, and more prestige. Ford's answer would come in the form of the flathead V8, a move that would change everything. Yet the groundwork for that revolution was laid by the Model A. While sales declined as the Depression deepened, the Model A's reputation only grew. Taxi companies, police departments, and rural mail carriers continued using them long after production ended. The car's mechanical honesty made it ideal for rough use. In small towns across America, you could still hear that distinctive four-cylinder thrum well into the 1940s. The Model A became a constant presence, sturdy, unpretentious, and loyal when times were tough. It was the machine that never asked for more than it gave. In the broader picture of automotive history, the Model A also represented a pivotal engineering moment. It introduced the concept of mass-produced precision at an attainable price point. Ford's factories adopted new processes, better quality control, standardized parts, improved assembly techniques that would define industrial manufacturing for decades. Even competitors grudgingly acknowledged that Ford had raised the bar. The company had proven that modernization didn't have to mean elitism. Innovation could still serve the common driver. The global impact was equally profound. The 1928 Ford Model A wasn't just an American car. It was exported to dozens of countries, assembled in Canada, Europe, and South America. It became a global ambassador of American ingenuity. In regions where infrastructure was minimal, the Model A adapted easily. It could handle rough terrain, run on varying fuel quality, and survive brutal weather. For many foreign buyers, it was their first encounter with American engineering, and it set a lasting standard for reliability. Yet for all its technical and cultural influence, what makes the Model A remarkable is how personal its legacy feels. Talk to collectors today, and you'll hear the same story repeated. A grandfather taught them to drive in one. A relative restored one from the family barn. A stranger waved at them on a back road, connected by shared recognition of history. Few machines inspire that kind of multi-generational affection. The Model A became part of people's identities, a mechanical heirloom. By the early 1930s, as America struggled to regain its footing, Ford faced a new reality. The Model A had done its job. It had saved the company, redefined the brand, and bridged a technological gap. But it couldn't stay forever. Progress demanded more cylinders, more sophistication, and more speed. When the V8-powered successor debuted, the world moved on. Yet something about the Model A lingered. It had achieved a kind of immortality by being the right car at the right moment. The fascinating irony is that while newer cars would eclipse it in performance, few ever matched its heart. The 1928 Ford Model A was more than a bridge between eras. It was the embodiment of American resilience. In a time of upheaval, it proved that innovation rooted in simplicity could endure any storm. That quiet endurance is what keeps it alive today in car shows, garages, and open roads across the country. Still, its true test wasn't economic survival, it was cultural survival. How does a humble four-cylinder car remain relevant almost a century later? The answer lies not in nostalgia alone, but in influence. The Model A set the pattern for how cars would connect to emotion, individuality, and identity. It taught America that progress isn't about abandoning the past, it's about refining it. And that's why, even now, when you see one chugging down a country lane or gleaming under sunlight at a classic meet, you're not just looking at old metal, you're witnessing the spark that ignited modern motoring. But the story doesn't end with endurance. The next part of the journey reveals how the Model A's DNA rippled across generations of engineering, culture, and craftsmanship. It shows why collectors still chase its simplicity, why restorers cherish its honesty, and why every car enthusiast owes a quiet nod to this machine that started it all. The 1928 Ford Model A wasn't just built to last, it was built to lead, and its influence still runs deep in the veins of every car that followed. The 1928 Ford Model A proved that innovation could survive adversity, but its true power came later, in the way it shaped everything that followed. After its production run ended in 1931, the Model A began a second life, one defined not by factories but by people. For enthusiasts, restorers, and everyday Americans, the Model A became a touchstone, a reminder of how progress feels when it's honest, tangible, and built to endure. The car's story didn't fade when assembly lines stopped. It evolved. The 1928 Ford Model A was never intended to be collectible, yet it became one of the most restored cars in history. During the 1950s and 1960s, as hot rodding culture exploded, teenagers discovered that these old Fords were cheap, strong, and endlessly modifiable. They stripped away fenders, chopped roofs, swapped engines, and created a whole new American art form. What began as practicality during the Depression turned into expression during the post-war boom. In garages across California and the Midwest, Model A's became the skeletons of freedom machines, raw, loud, and defiant. But not everyone wanted to modify them. A parallel culture of preservation took shape. Antique car clubs formed, dedicated to keeping the Model A exactly as it had been when it first rolled out in 1928. These enthusiasts valued authenticity, the look, the sound, the smell of the early motoring era. They treated restoration as storytelling. Every bolt and panel was a sentence in the larger narrative of American ingenuity. This dual legacy, customization and conservation, ensured that the Model A would never vanish from memory. It lived simultaneously in two worlds, as both icon and canvas. From an engineering standpoint, the 1928 Ford Model A's simplicity made it a teacher. Future mechanics learned fundamentals by working on them. The layout was straightforward, engine, transmission, rear drive, and yet refined enough to illustrate good design. Unlike later cars, which required specialized tools, the Model A invited curiosity. It rewarded understanding. Generations of tinkerers found confidence in its reliability and logic. In this way, the Model A helped create not just car culture, but car literacy. As America moved into the age of highways and high performance, the Model A remained an unlikely benchmark of practicality. It became the quiet standard against which other machines were measured for honesty. Even when Ford's later models grew more powerful, more luxurious, and more complex, none quite replicated the Model A's perfect balance between simplicity and satisfaction. It was approachable, adaptable, and grounded in human scale. Modern cars might outperform it in every measurable way, but they rarely evoke the same intimacy. Collectors today speak of the Model A with near reverence because it represents a moment when design, utility, and accessibility aligned perfectly. The car's proportions, upright stance, short overhangs, solid wheels, carry a timeless dignity. Its mechanical heartbeat, the rhythmic chug of that four-cylinder engine, sounds like history itself. And yet, driving one on a quiet country road doesn't feel outdated. It feels pure. It's an experience stripped of excess, one that reminds drivers what motoring was meant to be before technology, built walls between people and their machines. The Model A's endurance also shaped Ford's corporate DNA. The I got lessons learned from its production, quality control, flexible assembly, customer feedback became the blueprint for future success. Without the Model A, Ford might never have achieved the engineering confidence to introduce the flathead V8 or later build icons like the Mustang. Every evolutionary leap traced back to the 1928 Model A's philosophy: design for everyone, build with integrity, and never underestimate the value of emotional connection. On a cultural level, the 1928 Ford Model A is one of those rare machines that transcended its time. It became shorthand for American perseverance, the mechanical equivalent of a handshake: firm, honest, and direct. You see it in movies, in parades, in museums, and in the imagination of artists. When people depict the early automobile age, they don't draw the Model T anymore. They draw the Model A. It's the vehicle that made cars beautiful again after years of functional austerity. Even in the modern era, its spirit endures in subtle ways. The return of minimalist design trends, the resurgence of manual transmissions in performance cars, and the growing appreciation for mechanical transparency all echo the Model A's ethos. It reminds designers and drivers alike that progress isn't always about adding more. Sometimes it's about getting back to what matters. For restorers, every 1928 Ford Model A project is an act of preservation and patience. Finding original parts, matching paint codes, aligning mechanical tolerances, each step becomes a small tribute to a greater story. And when the engine finally fires after years of silence, it's more than a restoration. It's resurrection. It's history living again, powered by the same engineering spirit that first brought America into motion nearly a century ago. The Model A's place in history isn't defined by rarity or extravagance. It's defined by accessibility. Millions were built, yet every surviving example carries personal meaning. Some represent family lineage, others embody craftsmanship or nostalgia. And that universality is the secret to its immortality. Unlike exotic supercars that exist as status symbols, the Model A lives because it belongs to everyone. It's the everyman's classic, the people's heirloom. The 1928 Ford Model A also demonstrates that design sincerity never goes out of style. Look closely and you'll see the care in every line, the curve of the fenders, the stance of the grille, the symmetry of its proportions. It's form following function, but with quiet confidence. There's no arrogance in its shape, only purpose. It communicates the optimism of its time, when design was not yet dictated by aerodynamics or corporate committees, but by craftsmen with intuition and pride. As the decades passed, the Model A found new audiences. Younger generations discovered it not just as a relic, but as a gateway into hands-on mechanics. In an era dominated by sealed hoods and digital dashboards, the Model A offers something refreshingly human. A machine you can touch, understand, and fix yourself. It's tactile education, mechanical therapy, and rolling heritage all in one. In car shows across the US, a gleaming 1928 Ford Model A still draws a crowd. Kids point, older viewers smile, and conversations spark instantly. People don't gather around it because it's fast or rare. They gather because it feels familiar. It's a time capsule that speaks fluently to anyone who's ever fallen in love with the idea of motion. And yet, beneath all that nostalgia lies something profound. The Model A is still teaching lessons. About humility in design, about empathy in engineering, about the enduring value of making something well, even when no one demands perfection. Its story continues not because of what it once was, but because of what it still represents, the belief that technology should serve people, not the other way around. That's the quiet genius of the 1928 Ford Model A. It was built to meet the needs of its time, but it ended up defining timelessness. Its influence hums beneath every practical family car, every DIY restoration, every conversation about what makes a vehicle truly great. In the end, it wasn't horsepower or luxury that made the Model A immortal. It was honesty. And that honesty still resonates nearly a century later. Every time one of these machines rolls onto the open road, proving that simplicity, when done right, never gets old. The next chapter brings it all home. Why this car, born in optimism and tested by hardship, remains a touchstone for modern drivers and collectors alike. The 1928 Ford Model A didn't just define an era. It defined the enduring idea of what it means to drive with purpose. The 1928 Ford Model A stands today as more than a survivor. It's a living bridge between the origins of American motoring and the passions that keep it alive. For US viewers, that legacy carries real-world meaning. especially for those who dream of owning or restoring one. Prices for a well-kept 1928 Ford Model A vary widely, depending on body style and condition. A decent driver might cost less than a new compact car, while a concours-level restoration can command high five figures. But the real value isn't financial, it's experiential. Driving one is an immersion in the fundamentals of motoring: mechanical feedback, visible motion, and connection to the road. It's not about speed. It's about feeling the machine breathe beneath your hands. For those considering ownership, maintenance is refreshingly approachable. Parts availability remains excellent thanks to a vast community of suppliers and clubs. Many restorers describe the Model A as the most forgiving vintage car you can learn on: simple electrics, a rugged engine, and an engaged enthusiast base ready to help. The hardest part isn't fixing the car. It's resisting the urge to tinker endlessly. The satisfaction of hearing that four-cylinder rumble back to life never fades. In terms of reliability, the 1928 Ford Model A offers remarkable dependability for its age. Regular lubrication, proper timing, and clean fuel keep it running smoothly. Owners often drive them confidently on modern roads, albeit at modest speeds. The car's mechanical brakes demand anticipation, but mastering them becomes part of its charm. It teaches patience and mechanical empathy, skills that modern automation tends to erase. For collectors, the Model A represents a cornerstone of Americana. It's still a common sight at swap meets and vintage rallies, not as an elite artifact, but as a shared heritage piece. Entire families participate in Model A events, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. That intergenerational continuity mirrors what the car originally did: connect people across distances and differences. And while prices for pristine examples have risen, the barrier to entry remains welcoming. Few classics offer such authenticity without exclusivity. You don't need a climate-controlled garage or a trust fund to own a Model A. You need curiosity, basic tools, and a willingness to get your hands dirty. In return, you gain an unfiltered experience of what driving truly means. Even today, when hybrid SUVs and electric trucks dominate the landscape, the 1928 Ford Model A's silhouette commands quiet respect. Its upright stance and polished radiator shell still look purposeful, not quaint. It reminds us that engineering at its best reflects character. Each Model A that survives tells a story of endurance, of metal, of memory, of motion. For Americans who love cars, the Model A offers something deeply grounding. It's a reminder that our automotive culture wasn't built on luxury or technology, but on accessibility, ingenuity, and belief in progress. That spirit is worth preserving, whether you're behind the wheel of a century-old classic or a modern hybrid. So when you see a 1928 Ford Model A gliding down a parade route or parked at a Sunday show, remember, you're looking at the car that redefined mobility, restored pride to a company, and reshaped a nation's imagination. It's not just history on wheels. It's the reason we expect our cars to be more than machines. The 1928 Ford Model A didn't chase trends. It created them. It didn't shout. It spoke with confidence. And nearly 100 years later, it still whispers the same message every time the engine turns over. Progress doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to move us forward.